Well, hello. I wanted to make this little video showing off my second park in Planet Coaster. It's a chess theme fantasy park. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to call it, but probably Chess Kingdom or something like that. Um, it's all fantasy based. And very much the black and white color scheme is throughout. All of my coasters and buildings were based around them being chess pieces. So I've got an area that has the knight, the pawn, the bishop, etc. So let's zoom out a little bit so we can see the full park, and I'll show you just what exactly I did for this one. So again, I restricted myself a little bit from using the full park. I had about 3/4 of it, maybe just a half of it, and I wanted to make that as densely populated as possible. So I worked on the areas in sections. Some of them I spent more time on than others. I gave myself a week to work on this park. Mostly, I give myself deadlines, because I'm a firm believer that if you don't set an end time for a project, you'll just work on it forever. Um, there's still a lot that I could do and work on in this park, and I could expand on it a whole bunch, but at some point, I just want to say that it's completed and I can move on to another project, something with a different theme, after I've been working on something for so long. So we'll start off, since this is the first area here, with the knight. We've got the actual coaster itself, which I tried to keep the theming with the coasters true to their pieces as well. So for the knight piece in chess, it moves in L-shaped formations, and it goes over top of things. Like it will go up, and then it'll go in an L shape, and then it'll go down. So that's kind of what I went for with the actual coaster's movement as well, which doesn't make the guests happy, but it makes me happy for how the coaster turned out. I think it's pretty good. The actual building itself is somewhat like a reminiscent of a stables or a barracks. It was a pretty late realization that there are straw bales in the game. It took a while for me to find that. I had to have a friend tell me about them. And then we've got people here, archers, training under the watchful gaze of a knight, and a little square here where perhaps some knights train with themselves, and then the actual chess piece itself made out of art shapes. I think it turned out okay. You can at least recognize what it is. I didn't make an art shape for all of the pieces, but for the first three I did. The other ones I kind of ran out of time. I've got my chessboard here made out of pathing stones, and my fountain to help liven up the entranceway, and then the actual entranceway itself. Very checkerboard colored, so the brick is quite unnatural, but at least it keeps with the theme. And then we've got our castle town here. This is the area that most of the time was spent on, as you can kind of tell. It's got the most objects in it, and this is the bishop's area. It's the central area. I really wanted the bishop to have a cathedral, and for it to be facing the king's palace on the top there. The cathedral definitely outshines the palace. I spent a lot of time on this building, just a ton. I spent a full day working on it, and there are some parts of it that I've duplicated. The towers, for example, after I made one, I used the duplicate to make more of them and adjust the tops of them for the bells and stuff like that. But I'm just really happy with how this building turned out. It's my pride and joy so far. It's the best building I've made in Planet Coaster, and I really think that all around, inside and out, it turned out really well. I know that I could do a more efficient job if I were to start working on it now. Everything in Planet Coaster is a learning experience. The more that you do, the more experience you get with it, the more that just you get better at doing everything about this game. And so I really do like how this is the last side of the building that I did besides the inside, and it's got the chess theming here as the king coaster passes by it with a bunch of chess themes in its facing. These individual buttresses, which turned out okay. It was actually hard to get more of these supports, that's why they're so close to the wall. Now if we want to go inside here, it's another chess plaza. These are hidden pathways for the guests to get into the bishop coaster, which it enters and leaves the cathedral. This will be the entrance, that'll be the exit, and they can walk through the pews here and see all the candles. If I had had more time, more than a week to work on it, I would have probably tried to make an organ, because that's one of the things that really stands out. When I think cathedrals, especially for the interior, I think stained glass, I think these massive rows of candles, and I think of a large organ or some sort of fresco. But I didn't spend as much time inside the building as I did outside, especially with the pillars in the front. There's a lot of time put into this area just in general, so I was pretty exhausted, and it was late at night by the time I got here. But I do think it still turned out looking really well. These here are spotlights, so at night it doesn't look absolutely terrible, which a lot of this town wasn't meant to be viewed at night. There's some of it that just isn't lit up at all, but this building I think looks pretty good at night, and most of the town, Castle Town anyway, looks fairly well lit at night. Let's try to zoom out here. Yeah, so I think it looks okay. For the actual Castle Town itself, I made about 5 or 6 buildings, and then I replaced the shops and duplicated a lot of what they had already in the game. So some of this is my own, some of it, like this here, is pre-built just with a few modifications, so I didn't have to place 1,000 shops in these buildings. And then there's all of them have pathways and roads, and some of them have alleyways, and there's a lot of little miniature scenes I've set up in these streets. There's a lot of little hidden Easter eggs. I've got like a a fortune teller, and like a marketplace in the backs of some of these buildings. See if I can find it in this little central park here. Where is the oh, here's the fortune teller. Yeah, and they'll have like wells and areas that I would think that a city would have. My idea for the city was I wanted to make it as dense as possible, because people, when they congregate, tend to stack on top of each other, especially when they're restricted by walls like this. Unless there's a law preventing them, they'll build as close as they physically can to each other. And I think I've accomplished that pretty well. I think it looks like a real European town or something like that, just not built on a grid, built very much as the years progressed. Then we've got the Rook here. The Rook was built before the Cathedral, kind of obvious in the amount of detail it has. It's one of the things. The Cathedral has 5.5k pieces. This guy's got 500, so a little bit of an idea of how much time I spent on it, but I still think the Rook turned out fairly well. I think it looks kind of like Rook piece would, very much all angles, and the coaster, the coaster's probably the weakest one of the group. The Bishop coaster travels throughout the entire town, and it's a really good ride. I'm gonna upload a ride along for the Bishop. But for the Rook, I intended to make it like the chess piece as well. I wanted to, like the knight, I wanted to make it all sharp angles. It didn't turn out to look very good, and it didn't ride very well in first person, so I changed it around and just made it go a very short coaster that goes around the actual Rook piece. Over here we've got the peasant area. It's the pawn area, and so it's got its fields with some hay bales and some carts for the farmers, and a fair in their rural area here. So the only thrill rides and gentle rides are over here with the fair people. I've got a barn for the actual pawn itself, and it's a wooden roller coaster, of course, because they're just plebs. So for the pawn, again, this was a very much made to represent the movement of the chess piece on the board. It's got a very long, slow chain lift, goes straight up into a straightaway, and so it's very uninteresting until it gets to reach the end of the board, at which point you become a queen as a pawn, And that's when all of the crazy stuff happens with this ride. A whole bunch of really high speed turns and twists. And so my barn area here, made as one of the first buildings I fully constructed. My art-shaped pawn, which doesn't look all that great. There's an art-shaped rook as well. Right there, I think that's probably the best looking one of them. And then we've got the queen over here. So the queen I wanted to make as flighty as possible. I wanted to be pretty much at her whim. So it's a whole bunch of twists and turns and inversions and flying through all these floating magical rocks, just doing whatever she wanted to. This is her station housing over here. Very much just based on the queen doing whatever she wanted. She's the most free piece on the board, so that's what her coaster was made to represent, just her doing whatever it was that she wanted. And I had a lot of fun building that coaster. But if you were to ride it, you would probably get motion sickness. And then the palace here. So both the queen and the palace were built in a day. And it was not a full day. It was like 6 hours or so. So between the two of them, they only took about 6 hours to make, whereas this guy probably took like 18 or whatever. But they were the last two buildings I made for this park. Once I was done with them, I was done with the park. The King coaster goes through the building, and I think that the interior looks okay. It's nothing really all that special, just a nice view of the cathedral, which I'm really proud of course. And yeah, it's just made to finish up the park, and the actual King coaster, I'm pretty happy with how that rides. It's very smooth. It's made to again represent the king, so it doesn't have anything in the way of like fancy turns or loops really. It just kind of goes all the way around the park, and then it has a drop or a major large bump at each of the other pieces as he shows his face around town and visits all of his subjects. So they've got a drop over here by the knight, a drop by the bishop, and it's a really scenic coaster. I'm going to be uploading that one along with the ride along of the bishops, so that if you want to, you can take a look at it. Going to also, I've got this uploaded onto the Steam Workshop, so if you want to go take a look at it, you can just click the link in the description. And yeah, so thank you very much for just having a look as I show off my park. If you want to see more of it, there will be those two coaster ride-alongs, and if you have Planet Coaster, you can tour the park and disassemble it as much as you want, or just play in it from the Steam's Workshop link. So thank you guys very much for watching.